first shipment into Soolong Ranch went in June 2014. Since then, Halleen has been collaborating with the Soolong Ranch team to build their breeding project from an original shipment of 2,000 head to over 6,000 head. Soolong Ranch is integrated into the greater palm plantation. That covers about 70,000 hectares. This is a big area of land that can be properly utilised, where there's a lot of ground cover that the cattle can be integrated into. So now we've got a beef and palm integration, so utilising byproducts of the palm waste. You've then got natural fertiliser provided by the cattle, and they're also providing weed control underneath the palms. At Soolong Ranch, they have 150 staff, but each cell has 6 staff on a 2 people per shift rotation over a 24-hour period, so the cattle are always watched and looked over. The cattle run under palm in 30 hectare cells. This encapsulates about 400 to 500 head, where they roam through the day using the palm, eating the palm frond, and then they're provided supplementary feeding to add to this. So the cattle are moved daily from cell to cell and are kept inside these cells by electric fencing. Since Halleen has been part of this Soolong Ranch project, we've utilised Australian techniques in Indonesia. It really hasn't been seen before. They're utilising horses for mustering and the moving of cattle. We're utilising Australian techniques in controlled mating programs, and we've seen it now where they're really taking it to the next level in their animal handling and breeding techniques.
Thank you very much. It's a great video and a good introduction, or a good start to this discussion. And thank you to obviously LiveCorp, ALEC and QLEA for firstly putting this all together and inviting me to participate, albeit for 45 minutes now, and try and, I guess, tease out what is an extension of what the industry does. I'd like to start this conversation by talking a little bit about Red Meat 2030 that Don mentioned. One of the things that we've done as an industry well, we're very good at talking to ourselves. We're very good at talking to our customers and consumers, and what we were good at years and years ago was talking to the broader community, because a lot of that community were, in fact, we knew them. That was my second cousin or my best friend at school or something. So there was a very good and intimate understanding of agriculture. As you saw from the last speaker's statistics, our industry is still well regarded. We see that during times of adversity, droughts and floods, but those things can't be taken for granted. So one of the key things in the Red Meat 2030 program is the extension from just not consumers and customers in the supply chain, but to the broader community, and there's a substantial focus on delivering information to the community. I came late to acceptance of a thing called social licence. I thought licences were issued by governments, but I clearly understand what it means and am a devotee of the process, but I don't like the one-way nature of the issuance of a social licence. So why in Red Meat 2030, we've changed this around to a two-way process. That's our intention, is to re-engage and reinvent that interaction and relationship. And one thing that has been done that is material is the development of an industry affairs unit, which is across the entire industry, and the entire industry is part of it, and there's a task force that drives it. This man, Greg, is a member of that. Bindi Murray, who's been here until a very short time ago, from Western Australia, is a member of that. Stacey Wordsworth, who was up on the stage yesterday, is another. There is a small group of people that will drive that process of proactively talking to community about what this entire industry does. So a couple more quick things, and then we'll talk to the panel. The broader industry represents about 85,000 businesses. I'm talking the whole red meat and livestock industry. Over 400,000 employees. It's worth about $26 billion, and a very large amount of that is in regional parts of the country. So it's very important, and Simon Crean and I have discussed it many times. The processing section of our industry is the single largest processing or manufacturing sector trade exposed left in this country. So the whole industry, of which live export is a very substantial part, is very, very important to the overall business. Another key part of this, very quickly, is environment. What is misunderstood or not even considered is that the people in this room, the people in the broader industry generally, look after more than half of the entire land mass of Australia. So the national estate is cared for by the farming community, and we need to tell that story more. And as Simon asked the question earlier about food security, and that is a very key component of what we do. So we provide that food security both in this country and in many countries around the world, and it extends to more than that. And I look forward to getting some comments and some questions from the audience on how that impact, how we can use that impact to both drive our own industry forward, drive a better understanding in community, and by definition, a better understanding of governments in all countries, including our own, about the importance of all these extra things that occur. So on that note, let's start talking to the panel, and I'll start with Troy. So Troy, you're working obviously domestically. You do a lot of work in the live industry. You've been involved in it for a long time. Can you sort of touch on, or from your perspective, the things that you do and what this entire industry delivers to the communities that you work in?
Yeah, thanks, Don. Yeah, I guess we've been in the Charters Towers district and Western Queensland for 15 or 16 years. So, you know, we've seen it come and go a little bit, the LIVEX, but certainly it's been very strong the last few years, and got over its little hiccup a few years ago, and you know, the development and the numbers of cattle that have been going out of Townsville Port has certainly put a bit of security around, you know, our graziers and breeders of these cattle. So we've seen a big change there, and there's a lot of development probably happening off the back of LIVEX, I think, in our district.
So when we've seen the trade disrupted, you obviously see substantial change in price for periods. You see a change in the way people are able to spend money within the communities that you operate in. So to what degree does that sort of bring home to you the very importance of what is around 10% of the total sales of cattle alone? You take 10% out of any industry, that's a major component. It's very relevant when you're at Charters Towers. I would challenge people in the room at the same time. In 2011, when prices changed in the north, and that people in southern Victoria breeding Angus thought, well, that's not going to affect me, but it did. So from your perspective, you would have lived and seen that effect?
Yeah, certainly we did, and you know, back in 2011, I think everyone, you know, batted the hatches down and shut everything down. They shut their developments down and just done the basics. The last 12 months especially, live export's got a lot of consistency about it, and moving forward it's getting stronger, especially into our, you know, Vietnam. We've seen a big supply there this year, so you know, there's a lot of gearing up to supply that. Doesn't necessarily need to be going that way, but we've seen you know, a lot of people sort of thinking outside the box. They're just supplementing their cattle. I guess now they're looking to production feed them and get them set up for these markets, get their cattle prepared, and spend a bit of money on them because they're getting it back. So yeah, it's been good for our area, and it's giving people confidence to invest and buy better bulls and breed better cattle.
We'll talk a little now perhaps about the international impact that this industry has in the countries that we service. Ian, we saw your video. You've lived and breathed this industry up there for a long time, and you are obviously operating to work with communities, to work with some of the Indigenous exchange programs and things that you're involved with. Can you give us some sense of what you've seen change and what things you've done have delivered, you know, real value and benefit, as we say here, just simply beyond welfare? This is welfare for communities as well.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Briefly, I'd like to talk about two parts of it, and the first part is that exchange program that we have with the ILC and Sulong Ranch in Kalimantan. It was a a real eye-opener to us to see the ILC guys turn up over there. They're a little bit withdrawn to start with, but once they got into it their eyes really opened up to see the process of what they were doing back at home and their end product ending up in Indonesia there, in the communities they ended up there and how it benefited them all. And the reverse, seeing the Indonesian guys come down to Australia, and a big thanks to the ILC at Broome there. They did a wonderful job with those blokes, and they really, interacted with them, got into the spirit of it, and had a really good time. So it's worked on both sides of it in that respect, with the ILC, the Indigenous guys getting out there. And they came from all over Australia, from Queensland, Northern Territory, WA. But as I said, it was humorous to watch them to start with, to see them to break the ice. And we had a couple of really good people there to do it. Our preferred stock girl, Fiona Mary Baird, did a wonderful job there breaking the ice. Young Eudes in the room here now was really great in Broome himself too. But it really was tremendous to see these guys on both sides come out of their skin.
So that program is going to continue. The program also that I think ALEC runs, or the NTCA runs, on exchange of people, that's still continuing?
Yeah, it will continue. We have another one that's, I think, scheduled for early in the new year in January. So they'll be down. I think it's that way around. John might be able to correct me there. I think they're coming down this time, down to Broome. Correct. Yeah.
So what about the communities where you've done the work under PALM and things, and the sort of provision of experience and information and technology, and do you see that being, providing a substantial impact in those communities?
Yes, extremely so. Silong's a great story in that respect. We first went there, I think, in 2015 with 2,000 heifers and 100 bulls. That has now grown to, I think, in total, a herd of 6,000 cattle. And the technology transferred, the exchange programs, opened their eyes up to ways of doing things differently. And for, I think, to go from 2,000 heifers to 6,000 in 4 years is a pretty good effort for these guys. But what they actually do there, these beef palm integration programs are amazing. You go through these palm operations. On every corner you see a little store or something like that, where someone's selling cigarettes, water, coffee, whatever it might be. And you go into the bigger areas where they're processing. You have schools, play fields where they're playing soccer, and it really is a great point for them.
Thank you. Greg, it's a long time since you and I met in Lampung. You've been there working in the community for many, many years, and have seen the industry move from a small part of the activities out of Australia, particularly in Indo, but other areas. So in your time, what changes have you seen that have been just simply beyond providing protein to the community, but all the other things that come along with that?
I think, Don, the big thing is obviously we have very big workforces in Indonesia and Vietnam to some extent as well. So the feedlot there that I used to have an involvement with, the Tipperary feedlot at first, when I first went over there, we did some very strange things, and we had a workforce of up to 1,000 people at any one time. So it was very, very manual. All our corn was cut with knives, and then we had a team of ladies that made silage with the corn with knives, so we had no machinery. We had elephants compacting silage, so we rented a couple of elephants. We didn't rent a couple of tractors. So someone had to cut some palm fronds for the elephants, and someone had to take the elephant manure away. So just, the amount of people that can be involved in a business in Southeast Asia is huge. Right from the time the boat pulls up from alongside, there's a little truck there, and he takes all the bags away that's been used for the feed, and so he usually comes back 2 or 3 times. But he'll take that away, and those bags will be refilled with something to be sold to another feedlot. A huge impact on the community over there. So as we step forward, and I remember in our earlier days over there, we had up to 3,000 breeders all fattening cattle out in the farmer schemes. And so, that there would be 20 or 30 animals in a small feedlot, which had been built in conjunction with a village, and so the feed for that feedlot would be hand cut and carried, and you got 30 cows in there, and they're drinking 60 litres of water a day. So you might have 10 people allocated to carry the water in on their head to feed those cows. And Dickie and I had a program down in Kupang. So we had 2,500 little tiny local cows down there, supported about 7,500 people, or probably maybe 30,000 people down there. It wasn't a big investment, but they were really good things to help the community. And Dickie touched on it yesterday, that the need for partnerships between Australia and the importing countries is really, really special and really, really important.
Just expanding on that a little, I think, I don't know whether it was your comments, Dickie, or someone else's around what's the first thing you should do, but get a good partner. I don't know whether it might have been you or someone, could have been Dickie as well, but...
He doesn't like me, so...
He knows you better than anybody else. There's one of the things that I think as an industry we're doing probably more than many others is in fact now starting to invest. I know your own organisation and through CPC and through Ian's, where there's a lot of investment either in capital or in time or in systems. Is that the way to gain the sort of trust that can then deliver the benefits? And I think if you're in government and you're talking to all the countries that we're supplying products to, I get the sense, talking to ministers from both sides of the ocean, don't just sell us something, but come up here and work with us or invest with us and things. So that's the sort of point you're making, I presume?
Yeah, I think it's not only, it's monetary investment too, to work together to put some, one of Dickie's favourite sayings is put some blood in the game, and that's very important. We probably see coming into Indonesia, people coming in to do training and such. Look, probably they're a little bit over the training. They've done something for 1,000 years, a lot longer than we've done it, and that's how they like to do it, and that's how they want to do it going forward. And so it's not so much training, it's working together to work things out to make things better. So, as we heard in our speaker this morning, if we can fix it or make it better, well, that's what we should be doing. And so Indonesia is really craving that involvement now to work together more with investors, with Australia, to move forward and make things better for both sides. So that Indonesia is still a huge market, Vietnam's still a huge market, but they crave inputs and they crave improving things and they crave help, but they want to work together.
So in terms of getting the community to understand the importance of what we do overseas and equally what we do here, what are the things that the panel generally think we can do? So we're trying to make sure that the people out there who would listen to the noise around those people who would seek to put us out of business for their own fundamentalist reasons, but that 90% in the middle don't necessarily want to go along with it, but they need to get a better understanding. So to the panel, is there a way that you could see where we need to provide that level of information so we start to rebuild that knowledge, because the knowledge is what will maintain us in business. People who understand what you're doing, they then, around the water cooler at the office, when someone makes some comment, they've got something to say.
Ian, I think you've already done it in what we saw, and I haven't seen that project up there, but what you're doing up there is exactly what Don's talking about, I think.
Yeah, look, you're probably right, Greg, and thanks for the comment, but I could throw that back to you. You've been there a long time, and really to see what's going, you have to be a part of it to know what's going on up there. We can try and put it across as best as we can, but until you really see what goes on up in those countries and you're part of it, and as Dickie says, have skin in the game, it's hard to really see what goes on. But you've done some great stuff. There's a lot of others out there who've done some great stuff up there as well, but I don't really know the way that we get it across any better than what we have.
I'll just go to questions in a moment. One thing that has happened in the last week or 10 days to try and deliver some knowledge within Australia was Cubby Station invited all the councillors from up and down the Murray right through to South Australia to visit Cubby Station at Dirranbandi. So Cubby's a little bit like Adani or a bit like Live Export. It's the flashpoint for criticism of either use of water, animals or coal mining. And when they took those councillors to visit Cubby Station and they walked in there and said, you've actually got no water. And they said, we've had no water for several years, but we thought you were taking it all. That's the sort of thing that we just haven't done particularly well. So I think that's the important bit. When I took over at Ranges Valley as Managing Director 10, 11 years ago, I said to the staff, every day you have to be ready to have people come through our door and then look at our operation with nearly 40,000 cattle so that people with little knowledge would feel comfortable about what they saw. And I said, you've got to be that good every single day. The last year I was at Ranges, we had 650 visitors. And that to me was the way I thought it was the best way to do it. Open the door. If things go wrong, have a solution to fix it, and you gain enormous value through that process. Ewan Murdoch, the owner of Heron Pharmaceuticals, is a perfect example. When he had his products had poisons put in them and they were Coles and Woolworths, and what he did to deal with that elevated the value of his company enormously. So it's what we do about it is the important thing. So look, over to you. Let's see if there's some questions for the panel in regard to this important issue. Very difficult to see from here, but I'm sure there's somebody who wants to know more about what's happening. Oh, yeah, there's a question. Just wait a second. Here comes the microphone.
Yeah, it's probably two similar questions. If you could identify a major threat with all your knowledge, what would it be? And also, if you could change two things within the industry, what would they be?
When you just...
I'd have to say, sorry once again, I have to say complacency is one of your biggest threats. You need to be really proactive and stand up for this industry. It's probably, the transparency thing was a great thing. We've probably sort of been a little lazy in defending ourselves and defending this trade. And I think that's where we have to be more proactive to do that.
Troy or Greg?
Yeah, no, I agree with what Ian's saying. I think we've, as we know, we've been more reactive with a lot of things than proactive, I think, and we've got to get out that we do a good job, and we're out there, in the paddocks, and we're looking after our cattle. Everyone's trying to look after them, and everybody in the process wants to look after them the best they can. Nobody gets paid either unless they get looked after and they deliver the product. So I think we do. We lack that forward thinking and pushing ourselves out there that we are doing the right job, and as you said, Scott, until something goes wrong, that's when we pop up and hop on the defence. So I think we need to get up and get forward with it.
Greg?
Yeah, so again, I'll just support. We really need to sell ourselves a lot better to the greater community. That's the first thing. Two is you as producers, you just need to continue to strive to produce the article that Indonesia or Vietnam or China wants. And remember, those markets are going to come and go. So, Indonesia's a little bit slow at the moment, and Vietnam's going gangbusters. But there's nothing to. And then China, well, we saw the stats on the pigs here a while ago. China could overnight just explode and want everything that we could supply. So you've just got to keep your foot in the water, toe in the water, and make sure you're knowing what's going on. And I think we probably, as peak bodies, need to help producers more and let you know more what is actually happening. And finally, I think there's good opportunities for producers to go over in country, have a look around, see what's happening, talk to people, and remember you're putting animals on boats that's going to Vietnam or going to Indonesia or going to China, and look, if they're going for direct slaughter, that's the deal, direct slaughter. But if someone's taken them over there for feed them for 120 days, you just got to remember that someone has bought them off to feed, so the quality of the animal must be feedable when you put it on a boat. So if it's going for slaughter, okay, the spec will be determined. But if someone's going to try and feed an animal for 120 days, send them an animal that they can feed for 120 days.
A couple of responses from me. I've used this language a lot, but once we are defending and explaining, we've already lost the argument. It's too late for us. We have to be much more proactive than that. If you look at the ability to turn community sentiment, it will never come from someone like me who's the chairman. Of course he'll say that. It will come from you. The sheep collective, the cattle collective, that sort of process is, I think, the most important thing that we can do, because in 2011, the sentiment turned when it became personal. If you can sit on the streets in Sydney or Melbourne, sip me a cup of coffee and say, oh, I don't like that, so let's just get rid of that. And then someone says, well, actually, that employs that person there, and their children go to school. Oh, well, I didn't mean that. So you've got to make this a seriously personal thing for people. That's where the sentiment will turn. And in my view, what's the most thing we've lost the most is knowledge. We've lost that knowledge across the whole community. Any other questions? James.
Thanks very much. Just be interested to know what the panellists' view is on breeder cattle imports into Indonesia in the next year or two. The Indonesian government obviously wants to import more breeding cattle. So I'd just be interested to know, perhaps Ian, with the beef-palm integration, is that going to be the answer for the kind of numbers of cattle Indonesia wants to import? Troy, if there are actually going to be the numbers of breeding cattle available. And Greg, you obviously have a fair bit of knowledge on the Indonesian situation, so just be interested to get your opinions on how the Indonesian breeder market's going to play out in the next year or two.
Thank you. Look, firstly, I think that the breeding operation under palm there, it probably will go ahead. I have some very grave concerns about the small breeder operations that have been promoted by the government. I've seen them for, as I said, 30, 35 years. And most of these small operations never succeed. They just don't have the extension services to back them up. If the government wants to do it, the demand will come from the people. If it's wanted, that's the way they'll do it. But if they want to continue importing out of Australia, they'll do it that way as well. This self-sufficiency thing, to me, is a furphy. Greg would probably know better than I do.
So the question was, will the breeders be there? Well, of course, if it rains, there'll probably be no cattle to export for 6 months or for 4 months at least, and any animals that do go on a boat, you'll be equivalent to their weight in gold, which is great. Well, it's great in some ways and sad in other ways, because producers have got to restock, and so they're going to have to really dig deep to restock. But those people who've got cattle are going to make good money. So we're probably not going to see cattle leave when it rains, and it will rain. So Indonesia, it appears, have adopted the 5% based on licence. So if you apply for a 10,000 head of licence, you will have to import 500 female breeders. So let's say Indonesia imports 600,000 cattle next year. So what's that going to be? 30. So you're going to need 30,000 breeders straight up to go into the feedlot situation. So the feedlot situation, so that, the CPC feedlot has got 400 or 500 cattle out with farmers, smallholders at the moment, and it's a big job to have those animals out with farmers. It's constant control and constant assistance, but it does work to feed. We all know how much it costs to feed an animal on a feedlot here. Well, if we're going to have an animal in a feedlot in Indonesia, it costs exactly the same. You know, she's standing in a pen, you're feeding her feed every day. It's costing you $5 a day to feed her, times 365 days until she has a calf. So the calf's worth $1,800, and then it's only 70%. So it's the calf, when she drops a calf, worth $2,500. So you can't have them in a feedlot. You've got to put them out somewhere. And so the palm situation is an option, but it's slow to adopt, and there's a lot of learning to do. And Indonesia's keen to do it, but as Ian said, the smallholder government-backed programs have still got a lot of work to do. We've, ALEC and LiveCorp have done a lot of extension work over there, helping those schemes. Greg Smith, who's here at the moment, he spent hundreds and hundreds of days over there in some of those extension programs. Some have gone okay, some have not gone okay. So it will be continuing on. Indonesians want to buy more and more heifers, but it's hand-holding. You've got to hold their hands and make sure that they, because it's again about welfare, and we're pushing our welfare standards onto them, even with breeders, which is fine, but it's hand-holding, more hand-holding.
Troy?
Yeah, thanks. I think, yes, there's got to be, a bit of a shortage once it rains, I think, but we're still, everybody's still got surplus amounts of females that they require, and, we're still got to have good heifers. I think if you go and have a look at an export yard at the moment, a feeder job going into Indo, they're going over as feeders at the moment, but there's no reason why they couldn't be drafted off and treated as a breeder article as well. Like the quality of our cattle going over there, they're not necessarily culls, they're surplus to our requirements. So, and the quality is very good in a lot of these cattle. So I think going forward, I still think, there's a good percentage of those females that come in are eligible to be breeders, and probably going forward they've got to be worth a bit of money to everybody locally or going to export. So, once again, it just comes back to, I think we've just got to really focus on the quality that we're breeding at home, and producers have got to be paid for them as a feeder article or hence a breeder article going into these countries.
Thanks. Further questions? Got to be somebody has something burning away at them. Is this the moment when we make up time, Don?
The one thing we sort of haven't touched on is, and I just saw Elliot from Animark walk in, which made me think about it. But is the employment and workforce which is involved in the welfare side in Indonesia and Vietnam? Like the CPC operation over there would directly employ around about 80 people, and indirectly maybe employ 250 people just involved in welfare. And that's just people to stay at processing facilities, that's people at the port, people involved at the feedlot, people in... I was in Bali last week at the Global Compliance Control Room over there. So you sit in a room which is a bit bigger than this stage, and there was 15 staff in that room looking at a massive bank of TV screens, which were facilities all over Vietnam, and it was amazing. And they'd say, well, Greg, there's some cattle unloading there, and we'll watch those cattle load. There's some cattle loading in this facility in a feedlot, and then in 2 hours' time they'll see them unloading at a facility, and then in another 3 hours' time they'll see them be processed. So the amount of labour being employed because of SCAS, which is a great thing, is huge as well. And again, that's people are learning about welfare. People are understanding greater values, and we say again, there's 100 countries export cattle around the world, and we are the best, and we're teaching people to have the same thoughts as what we think.
One comment I would pass to everybody in the room, and particularly the production sector, the transport sector and others. We've had the flashpoint places that are concentrated on, and we saw some of those move to other places in the last week with the processing facility at Caboolture in the horse industry. you know, there is no doubt at all that if you think that these issues don't directly, the focus is not directly on you, please let me assure you that it will be, if it isn't already. So we have to all be part of this process. We have to make sure that the activities on farm, in transport, in whatever it is, that you all play a role because there's somebody watching you. And we need to make sure as a whole of industry that we are so conscious of these things that we build up that trust bank that was talked about earlier with community. Communities will allow you to make mistakes. We will make mistakes, but what we've got to have is enough money in the bank with those communities that when those things go wrong, that what we do about it is good enough, and therefore we can move on from it. Look, thank you all very much. Thank you to the panel. This whole issue of the broader contribution of industry to the welfare of communities, the welfare of our customers and the communities in which we sell and the communities that it comes from is a vital part of all of us transmitting that information so that people do understand that this is not just about making money from animals, it's about a whole lot more than that. So thank the panel, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you very much.